Friday, August 8. Further thought. If you have access from the book Patriarchs and Prophets, you might like to read the chapter titled The Exodus, and that's on pages 281 to 290. God was for the Israelites despite their lack of faith. He wished to teach and guide them in how to think and behave as his chosen people. God led them patiently and directed them to a location where they would encounter fewer challenges. Ellen G. White explains in page 292 of Patriarchs and Prophets, the Israelites had little knowledge of God and little faith in him, and they would have been or become terrified and disheartened. They were unarmed and unaccustomed to war. Their spirits were depressed by long bondage, and they were encumbered with women and children, flocks and herds. In leading them by the way of the Red Sea, the Lord revealed himself as a God of compassion as well as of judgment. End of quote. Talking about the Song of Moses, the Andrews Bible Commentary says, the certainty of this redemptive act of God in history assures us that we have nothing to fear for the future. This is on page 214 of the Andrews Bible Commentary, the chapter Exodus. And we continue with the quote. The last stanza focuses on future enemies who would be faced in conquest of Canaan. Because of God's powerful arm, they would be as still as a stone, as it said in verse 16. When we face certain impossibilities, when we feel cornered and do not know which way to turn, we can find assurance in the Song of Moses, for it commemorates a great event in the history of God's people. And that brings us to our three discussion questions for this week. 1. Why do we find ourselves so often in the position of the Hebrews after their incredible deliverance from Egypt, but before the challenge of the Red Sea? That is, in the face of so much evidence for God's goodness toward us and of his power, why do we still find it so easy to show and even express a lack of faith? And question 2. Even after all that had happened, including the loss of the firstborn sons, why would Pharaoh still pursue Israel? What should this tell us about how dangerous it is for any of us to get hardened by sin or to sin? And question 3. Although we all face terrible trials at times, many of us have had, and still have, some very good days, some very good times when nothing bad happens to us or to our loved ones. Why should we see these times as evidence of God's grace and protection? Because, after all, we understand that we live in enemy territory. That is, why should we always remember to praise God in the good times? Because we never know what calamities we have been spared from.
For further reading, Go Forward in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 4, pages 20 to 27, and In the End, God's Enemies Will Perish, Christ Triumphant, April 9, page 106.
Special Mission Hospital by Andrew McChesney. Dmitry Begal, a Russian missionary living in Germany, found a hospital to be an unexpected mission field while receiving cancer treatment for what turned out to be 3 benign tumours. He saw people from all walks of life, especially secular and post-Christian people, and people from non-Christian world religions, struggling over tough questions about God. One patient received 6 rounds of chemotherapy and underwent an operation at the Munich hospital. But when his cancer returned after 6 weeks, the doctor saw no point in removing it again. The man couldn't think clearly and barely recognized his wife. Her only desire, meanwhile, was to stay with her husband during his last days in the palliative care unit. An opportune moment, Dmitry gave the wife a booklet about God and suffering, and he prayed with the couple. The prayer moved the wife to tears. Later that day, Dmitri gave the woman copies of The Great Controversy and The Desire of Ages, saying the books have provided great comfort to him and many others. The woman wanted the books, but not for free. She gave him 14 euros, which is approximately $15, all the change in her purse. Dmitri believes that the two will meet again, if not on this earth, then on the new earth. Dmitri also met a young man hospitalized with an unknown illness. The man, who was from Iran, had given up his studies in Britain and flown to Germany for treatment. Doctors, however, couldn't diagnose his illness. He couldn't walk, so Dmitri pushed him around the hospital grounds in a wheelchair nearly every day. Even though he hadn't been raised Christian, he allowed Dmitri to pray to Jesus on his behalf. As Dmitri prayed day after day, the young man began to recover. Before long, he could stand and walk with assistance. The two conversed in German, but because the young man had studied in Britain, Dmitri gave him an English copy of The Great Controversy. Months later, Dmitri was still praying for him, treasuring the words, "But remember that you do not know and cannot measure the result of faithful effort." A quote from Ellen G. White, Colporteur Ministry, page 114. During 2 weeks in the hospital, Dmitri gave away 20 copies of The Great Controversy, as well as other books, distributed many business cards with QR codes to download the book, and stocked about 10 of the hospital's public bookshelves with books. "Many seeds have been sown, and I pray that they will bear fruit," he said. "We work under God's guidance and leave the results to Him." This inside story illustrates mission objective number 2 of the Seventh-day Adventist Church's I Will Go strategic plan, to strengthen and diversify Adventist outreach among unreached and underreached people groups and to non-Christian religions. You can read more at I, will, G, go.org.
And remember, God is always faithful.